Good morning and welcome to AXA Coral Live. We're broadcasting here from the Kamabi Research Station on the island of Curacao in the Caribbean. Welcome one and all. We have schools from Nigeria, the United Kingdom, India, Cyprus, Israel, Egypt and Spain this morning. Welcome. This morning's session is a live investigation. It is a coral food chain mobile, so we'll be looking at some of the amazing life that lives in and around the reef. And we're moving on from our topic of yesterday. Yesterday we're focusing on the coral polyp, and that's the amazing animal that makes up the reef. Today we're going a little bit wider. We're looking at the sort of whole coral habitat or coral ecosystem. So learning a little bit more about some of the other animals and plants that live on the reef. So we've got a live investigation now. We've got a expert interview with Dr. Mark Vermeer, and that is in an hour and a half's time. He is the Deputy Director here at Kamabi, and we'll be looking inside his lab, which is just behind us here. After that, Ellie, who's behind the camera at the moment, and I will be hosting an Ask Me Anything, a coral Q&A. So please do send in as many questions as you can about the coral reef. And then those three sessions are repeated in the afternoon for our audiences in the Americas. So very much looking forward to having them join us later today. So great to have you with us. And I've just got the live feed coming through next to me as well. So we're going to start off really with just a quick reminder of what we're talking about, the coral animal, the coral. So for those of you who were following us yesterday, I've got some examples of coral here. A maize coral, a bit like a brain coral, a hard lump of rock basically. This is the sort of coral skeleton, and it is made from limestone taken out of the water. And the animal that does that is a coral polyp. It's related to a jellyfish like this and a sea anemone like this, but it's a tiny sea anemone like animal, so a bit like a tiny jellyfish stuck to the bottom of the ocean. And you can see a bit more clearly here with this flowering coral that it creates these cups and it lives in. So imagine an upside down jellyfish living inside here, mouth in the middle, 12 tentacles coming out and round, feeding for copepods, so plankton, small animals in the water. We're getting a little bit into some of what we're discussing later. But also it has algae living inside it that gives its energy. Taking this mineral from the water, and then when it's getting to a certain size, splitting into two, basically cloning itself, and then splitting and splitting and splitting in a process called budding, and growing into these amazing shapes. And here we have one more shape to share with you. I'm going to bring this a bit closer. This is a star coral, so you can see each of the individual places where the coral polyp, those individual animals, would be. Now, the important thing isn't just that the coral's mind-numbingly amazing, this tiny thing that can clone itself and build these beautiful, beautiful structures, but also the fact that this creates a 3D sort of underwater city that provides somewhere for lots of other life to live. And we're going to be looking at those other living things today. Now, what I'd love to have is to have a little bit more, some ideas from you guys, and I'm going to get through from the live chat if you can name as many coral animals as possible. I'm just thinking about those. Get all those animals that you think are associated with the reef coming through, and we're going to then, over the course of the next sort of 15-20 minutes, we're going to start sorting those into herbivores, carnivores, omnivores, even maybe spongivores, specialist sponge eaters, and having a think about how all of these different animals connect together in food chains. So let's just see, maybe I've got some examples of animals starting to come in very soon, and we'll have a look at those. So the first one I've got coming in is shark, of course. The shark, very, very famous sort of marine animal. We haven't seen a shark yet out in the waters here. We did see a barracuda, which I think looked more menacing than the sharks when we were in the water a couple of days ago. Here we also have the clownfish that's been sent through. That's been great. So clownfish is another animal that's made very, very popular by the film Finding Nemo. And it is not, unfortunately, an animal that we're going to find on the reef in the Caribbean. So it's an Indo-Pacific fish. So if you go, I think if I'm pointing in the right direction, a long way that way towards the Coral Triangle or the Great Barrier Reef, that is where you would find Nemo. So we are not finding Nemo on Coral Live this year. We've got a shark coming through. We've got sea slugs, fantastic. Some of our favourites on Coral Live, the nudibranchs or the sea slugs. In fact, we've got a gallery online of some of the amazing colours and shapes that you find with the sea slug. Nudibranch just means that their branchia, their sort of breathing apparatus, are on the outside of their body. We just had from Mr. Wicks's class, we've got parrotfish, fantastic. Yes, parrotfish you will find out here, and the nibbly parrotfish we're going to come up with a bit later. And then the crown of thorn starfish, again from Mr. Wicks's class, that's a fantastic one. The crown of thorn starfish is a voracious coral predator that is causing absolute havoc for the coral populations on the Great Barrier Reef. And the angelfish, lovely angelfish. Here we've got, I haven't seen an angelfish. Ellie, have you seen an angelfish yet? Not yet. Fantastic. And the polyp, yes, the wonderful polyp in all shapes and sizes. So the polyps here from Miss Wilson's class, that's fantastic. Tube worms, we probably find some wormholes, just to sort of show you where. Let's try and find some wormy casts on here. That's not a particularly good one. Oh, here we go. And if you can see, there's a sort of like a sort of, if you probably on this side where my finger's waggling, you can sort of see a worm cast shape. So worms definitely burrowing into the coral limestone and finding a little home here. We do have one of my favourite worms on the reef out here, and that's the Christmas tree worm, which has a little sort of feeders that sort of looks like small Christmas trees coming out, and we'll get some shots of those from the waters probably this afternoon or tomorrow and get those up online. Wow, phytoplankton and zooplankton, it's all happening now. The box jellyfish, particularly unpleasant. So they are a type of jellyfish, cubozoa, tiny wee, but with an incredibly horrible sting and can kill. I think I'm right in saying that Irukandji is a type of box jellyfish, and probably one of the most dangerous animals on the reef, and it is about this big, tentacles about this long, and can cause immense pain, even leading to death. Whew. You're all awesome. So you obviously know a lot about some of the animals that live on the reef. We're now going to start to think about connecting some of these together, and we've already started to talk about some of the different types. We've thought about, you know, do they eat? What do they eat? Do they eat each other? Do they eat other animals? Do they eat plants. So we're going to go and have a sort of guessing game. I've got, hopefully what you have is you have some coral life cards sheet like this, expertly cut up and stuck to a bit of cardboard. So we're going to go through these different living things on the reef, and we're going to think about how they connect together. So this is something we call interdependence, and it's how through feeding relationships the living things connect together. So start to, even if you haven't cut them out yet, start to identify these, and we're going to go through them one by one, and then we're going to talk about a little bit about how they're connected. So no real order here, but I'm just going to take them out one by one, have a look at them, and if there are any questions at the end, I'm going to then look at the live chat and see if you need me to clarify anything about these different animals. Now Ellie will tell me whether they're in focus or not. I'm going to bring them sort of quite close to the camera so you can see them more closely. Now first of all, we have the parrotfish. Now the parrotfish, beautiful, beautiful colours, and they have this parrot. Have I got my fingers over the parrotfish's bill? I do. Oh, there we go. Is that better? So it's this bill shaped like a parrot's beak, and that's designed to scrape algae off the reef, or algae, and also sometimes it chews up bits of coral, and that coral's got lovely nutrients inside it, and then the powdered sort of limestone that we've seen here then gets pooped out and starts to form beaches. So we've got the parrotfish feeding on the coral itself. Next up, we have this Staghorn coral, and it's a named Staghorn because you can see the shape of it looks like the antlers of a deer, and but you know, coral, as we've seen, comes in all different types of shapes and sizes. Just next to us here, we've got mainly sort of brains and maize corals, unfortunately the sort of branching coral like this was taken out by a storm a few years ago and hasn't regrown yet. Next up, as some of you amazingly pointed out, we have the shark. This is a tiger shark, the apex predator on the reef, and really just taking out lots of different things. The tiger shark is fairly, you know, unfussy eater, and we'll have a go at most things. Next up, here we have a green turtle. Now turtles eat a variety of different things, but the green turtle is vegetarian and will enjoy feeding on seagrass off the shore. Then we have here, this is the seagrass, wonderfully related. And so it's not seaweed. Seaweed is actually a type of algae. If it's tiny wee floating around, it's called microalgae. If it's big seaweed like you might see off the coasts in Northern Europe and North America, it's called macroalgae. But this seagrass is in fact a flowering plant, and you get meadows. So just like on land where we get lots of different habitats, it's the same in the ocean. So you get seagrass meadows, and you might find the green turtles happily feeding there. What's next? Aha! Next up is the Manta Ray, and as you might be able to see from its mouth and its head, it's basically swimming through or flying through the ocean with a giant sieve for a mouth, and it's eating up all the tiny zooplankton, so that's the tiny larvae, eggs and small animals in the water. We then have a copepod. A copepod is, I think, one of the most amazing creatures in the ocean. There's about 1,300 billion of them. They're the most abundant animal on the planet that you've never heard of, or most abundant animal on the planet, full stop. They are about, depending on the species, the length of your pinky fingernail, and they go through the ocean gobbling up little bits of phytoplankton, so single-celled algae. And here we have that single-celled algae. We call it phytoplankton in the ocean. So that's plankton, things that float on the ocean currents, and phyto, so it's getting its energy from the sun. But there's one missing thing from our food chain or food web, and that is the most important piece. That's the sun. So the sun is providing energy right at the top of the food chain, unless of course you're living in the deep sea vents, and that's the only other. So at sort of primary school, you're normally taught that the sun is where all food comes from. If you get slightly older, you'll find out that there's a chemical reactions taking place by deep sea volcanoes, basically, or deep sea vents that also provide energy for life. So we're going to check, hopefully, just to see whether there are any questions for clarification coming through on any of those animals that we've, or living things that we have talked about. Ellie, I'm now going to start sort of working from about where this coral is, all the way down, sort of going down this way, moving some of these out of the way. So the sun's going to go about here, if that's okay. Great, so at the top of our food chains, we're going to have the sun. And I'm not going to make the whole food web now, but we're going to think about, so from the sun, what comes next. So we're going to have to try and find one of these cards that gets its energy from the sun. And I'm just going to help you out on this first one. And we're going to do a very, very simple food chain. And the direction is always the direction of the energy goes. So from the sun, we've got energy going to the seagrass. So it's creating sugars using solar energy to get the sort of products of photosynthesis. So sugars, it's making sugars using the sun's energy. And then the very, very happy green turtle munching on the seagrass, as we've got the energy flow going from the sun to the seagrass to the green turtle. So just make sure you've got that concept going with your class, the energy flow from the sun to the seagrass to the green turtle. I'm just going to check to see how we are getting on. And we've been asked for the name of the one before, the phytoplankton, and that's a copepod, and that's C-O-P-E-P-O-D. And if you're into your classics, that means I've got feet like oars, so I can swim through the ocean. Okay. I'm now going to see if I can make a slightly longer food chain. So I'm going to take these ones away. I'm going to leave the sun there, because the sun's always going to be at the top of our food chain. And let's see what we can do. I'm going to go the sun, helping these plant-like algae grow. And then eating those single-celled algae, I'm going to have the copepod. So I've got 1, 2, 3. and then eating the copepods. I could have lots of things here, but I'm going to confuse things. Maybe I'm going to go for a slightly shorter one. I'm going to go for the Manta Ray. Have you got that, Ellie? Is that, yep. At the end there. So I've got energy going from the sun to the algae to the copepod to the Manta Ray. Do you think the Manta Ray is going to be lucky or unlucky today? Huh? Unlucky Manta Ray. Oh no. So I'm just going to move this lump of coral, and we might find out that that's shark lunch or breakfast. And it all going down here. We've got that energy transfer. So I'm just giving you just a sort of moment to catch up in the class, because I know that the pace of this can sometimes be quite fast. For the rest of this, what we're going to do is we're going to just make sort of probably 3 slightly shorter chains, all powered by the sun. And we're going to learn something that's really important about the marine habitat, the ocean habitat, and especially the reef. When you learn about food chains on land, very often you learn about plants, and the plants are what we call a producer. Yeah, they're producing the energy using producing the food using the sun's energy. Now, in the ocean, we have more than just one type of producer. So on land, it might be just the plant, but we actually have more in the ocean. Coral's a little bit confusing, and I'm going to talk about coral now before we come on. Now, do you remember our coral polyp? Like, it's going like this. So the coral polyp here, I'm just going to have these two here, with its tentacles, is getting energy by catching little plankton like the copepod with its tentacles and eating it into its mouth. So I'm just going to put that there. So is this in focus now with my finger? So little tentacles coming out of here, capturing tiny little plants and animals, not animals, sorry, plants. So capturing tiny little I'll start again. So in each of these, tiny little animal with tentacles catching small animals drifting past on the ocean current. But if you have seen the incredible edible polyp, you will also know that inside the tissue of each of these is a algae, and that algae gets its energy from the sun. So confusingly, when we're talking about food chains, we can say a little bit that the coral gets its energy from the sun, but if we're being truly I've got this a little bit wrong way around, haven't I? We'll start again. So let's think about this. So the energy, and apologies for this because we've got some complex things going on, going from the copepod into the coral. So that's the direction that we should have, and I didn't want to confuse you by saying that, by talking about the relationship here, the wrong way around. So energy from the copepod going into the coral. Now, what I was talking about was that solar energy also powers the algae that live inside the coral tissue, and it gets an extra energy boost, of about 70 to 90% of its total energy from the algae that lives inside its tissue. But we technically, if we're being very technical about it, we have to classify the coral polyp as a carnivore, as a consumer, because it gets its energy by eating the copepod. Because it doesn't eat the algae inside it, it just shares the sugar. So it's a sharing relationship. That may be a little bit beyond some of the younger students watching, but I just thought I'd add in that detail. So what we're going to do, so we've got some great questions coming through. I can see it's quite complicated. What I'm going to do though is before we go through all of these, I am going to just do 3 food chains that you might like to think about in the classroom. I'm going to put mine together with cable ties, and I'm going to punch holes in them with a Leatherman. Please do not use a very sharp object like this in the classroom for doing this activity. So I'm just going to make a hole here. I've already put a hole in one finger yesterday doing some work on our set here. And I'm going to put another hole. So we're going to go here. There we go. So we're going to go from the sun to phytoplankton, from the phytoplankton to the copepod, and from the copepod we're going to go to the Manta Ray. I'm going to start joining those up now. Oh. There we go. So I'm just going to get this the right way around. I'm managing not to do this very well. I hope your craft skills are much better than mine. So again, we've got the sun, solar energy coming into the phytoplankton or algae. We're then going to have the algae being eaten by the copepod, and we'll get this all lined up for you soon. And then down at the bottom here, the copepod into the Manta Ray. So here we have one of our coral food chains, from the sun to the phytoplankton to the copepod to the Manta Ray. And I'm just going to make 2 more short ones. I've only got one sun, so you can imagine them coming off the sun as well. So we're going to have the seagrass here. coming into the green turtle. So quite a nice little short one here. So imagine the sun here, or sun, where is the sun? Sun over there, but the sun here. Photosynthesis, and then into the green turtle. I'm going to do one more, and we're going to have basically the complicated coral getting 20 to 30% of its energy from eating copepods, but most of its energy, so 70-80% of its energy, from the algae that live inside it, and those get their energy from the sun. Okay. So in the classroom, what you can do is start to lay these out and start thinking about putting them together in a food chain. And then your teacher should have a diagram of how to connect all of them together. So don't worry if you're not finishing at the moment. I'm just demonstrating a few of these for you. And what you can do is then finish this off after the end of the chat or in your next lesson. Or maybe even take them home to show friends and family what you've been up to. So here we have the Staghorn coral being munched on by the parrotfish, and the parrotfish being shark supper. And we'll lay that down here too. So these are just some of the food chains that you'd find on the reef. So at the top we have the producers getting their energy from the sun. We're getting consumers that are getting their energy from eating something else. And it's a herbivore if it eats a plant, and it's a carnivore like the shark if it's eating another animal like the parrotfish. So we have producers getting their energy from the sun, algae, the algae inside the coral and the seagrass. We've got consumers eating other things, so everything down here being a consumer. So consumers of the copepods and the turtles and the parrotfish and the sharks and the manta rays. And if those consumers are eating a plant, they're herbivores, and if they're eating an animal, they're carnivores. So before I go and get the questions that are coming up on the live chat, I'm going to go back and look at some of the pre-submitted questions that we had for this session. So this is a shout out to Primary 4 at Brains International School in Madrid in Spain. And I've been asked, I think this is Diego, what types of food chains are there under the sea? Well, hopefully this has helped you to answer that question with examples of some of the food chains that we find on the coral reef. And just to remember, food chains starting with the sun, then going to producers, which can take many shapes and sizes, then consumers, which can be herbivores eating plants and carnivores eating animals. We have Emilio, what do sea turtles eat? We've got one example of a sea turtle here, the green turtle, and that is eating the seagrass. But we also get examples of sea turtles eating jellyfish or sponges, so the loggerhead and the hawksbill turtles happily munching on sponges and other crustaceans respectively. So it's a big old mix, and some of them like eating both. So it really depends on the shape of their mouth. So have a look at the different shaped mouths on the different species of sea turtle and have a guess about what they might like munching. This is how do corals make their food? Well, interestingly, we've seen that they've got this sharing relationship with a type of algae that lives inside their body. So it's like having a vegetable garden living inside you, and that gives them sugars. And also use their tentacles, mostly at night, to catch tiny little animals that we call zooplankton floating around on the reef. Is the coral food chain very long? We've done some simplified ones here, but we've seen the sort of 4, 5, maybe 6 levels that you could find in terms of the different levels of the food chain. And if you remember that we added the shark down below the manta ray. What do jellyfish eat? This is from Oriole. If we remember, talking about jellyfish, they are another animal with tentacles and with a body, and it really depends on their size. So if they're tiny wee, they're more likely to eat tiny animals in the ocean, and if they're much bigger, they might be going for bigger animals like fish, like some small fish. So it really depends on the size of the animal. You do have examples of jellyfish also that have these algae inside them to give them a little bit of extra energy boost, but they're not actually eating those algae, they're just depending on the sugars they produce. So this is a shout out to the Mistral class from Miss Morehouse. So we have how much coral is in the ocean from Emily. Emily, that's a great question. So coral covers about just under sort of 1% of the planet, under 2% of the ocean floor. So a tiny proportion of our planet is coral reef. But the amazing thing is it supports 25% of all marine species. So quite incredible job that the coral does. Lacey is asking, have I seen a leatherback turtle while diving? Lacey, very sadly not. But have seen green turtles, but not leatherback ones yet. Oscar, how hot is the ocean? Well, the ocean really varies in temperature. So if you're swimming in the ocean when we're doing Arctic Live, the temperature is likely to be in the region of about minus a little bit to plus 2, 3, maybe even 4 degrees centigrade. The coldest that the sea temperature gets is about minus 1.8, and then it turns into ice. So because it's salt water, it can actually still be liquid below freezing. And then the warmth of the ocean at the moment here is about 28 degrees, 29 degrees centigrade. Coral like it in the sort of range of about 23 to 28, 29. So this is probably the upper range for what coral likes. So that's the kind of temperature we have here in the tropics. So about a sort of 35-degree range. Does coral turn black? This is from Grace. If it does, why? There is a disease that some corals can get called black band coral disease, where it's dying. So that disease turns it black and during death. When we see coral completely dead, it in fact is white. So if we remember that the skeleton of the coral is this sort of limestone material, this calcium carbonate that's white. But yes, there is a disease, black band coral disease, that turns it black. Here we are, and the last question before we move on to the live chat is, have you seen any peculiar sea creatures? And that's from Abby. Abby, that's a great question. Some of the sea creatures I love are the tiny wee ones, the nudibranchs, sea dragons, which is a type of sea slug, which I think is amazing because it can eat poisonous cells from jellyfish and then use them as an attack, or not attack, but it's a defense mechanism. But use that so those chemicals from the jellyfish for defense. And also for me, the Christmas tree worm is wonderfully bonkers. Please do look up online Christmas tree worm to have a look later. If any of you like particularly disgusting things, you should look up, and I'm not going to do this live, but look up sea cucumber defense, and just to see how disgusting and peculiar life in the ocean can be. If I'm prompted up towards the end, I might describe to you the process by which a sea cucumber might defend itself. So let's get down to the live chat. Here we go. How much of the coral reef have you discovered? Personally, I've been involved in an expedition called the XL Catlin Seaview Survey, and it's not so much about discovering the coral reef, is that we didn't have a good scientific baseline, and that's sort of knowing how much coral cover there was and the diversity of the different types of species there. So that has been surveying sort of hundreds of kilometers of reef over the past 6-7 years to find out where the coral cover is and what the species are. Now, people are still discovering coral reefs, but they're much deeper in the ocean. Most of the coral reefs near the surface have been discovered, except for there's one near the Amazon, I think last year or the year before, near the mouth of the Amazon, they discovered a new coral reef recently. So that's very exciting. So there are still new things to discover in the shallow waters, and definitely in the deep of the ocean. I think we only know, we've only biologically surveyed, I think, 0.001% of the ocean depths. Let's see here. How does food chains differ for coral in the midnight zone without sunlight? Well, technically, the midnight zone, so that's deeper in the ocean. So what's happening, ignore the rest of this going on here, but remember we said that they ate copepods and that little plankton going around. That's still true wherever they are. They're just not getting the extra boost from the algae. So corals in the midnight zone, they are consumers, they're eating with their tentacles, we animals coming past, they're just not getting that extra boost from the algae inside them that relies on sunlight. The Mead School, we're watching during break time, we learned to view, thank you, back to lessons. Well, thank you so much for watching. Mr. Ansel, what kind of food chains are there in the midnight zone? I mean, really what we're seeing is that you're going to have sort of similar, I mean, we have, I think we've got some deep sea live card game online, and so that we can, if we can get that on the live chat, we can link to that from our submarine STEM resources. But you're still going to get those really sort of important things to understand. You're going to get your producers, which may be getting their energy from chemosynthesis. So that's using the chemical energy really from deep sea vents to produce that instead of the sun. Or you're going to get, in the deep sea, you're going to get animals relying on things falling down from the surface. And that's in sort of two ends of the spectrum of that are what we call marine snow. And so that's tiny sort of dead sort of algae and little sort of larvae and sort of tiny little particles that are floating down through the ocean. So it looks like snow if you light it. And so you get animals on the seafloor that rely on that. And then you get the big, exciting sort of like feasts of sort of whales sort of dying and falling to the bottom of the ocean. And then you get all the different animals that start to feed on that. So your giant isopods and your hagfish and everything getting involved there. So different habitat from Coral Live. We hopefully will be bringing you Submarine Live next year, so stay tuned for that. But for now, we'll stick a bit in the sort of like tropical sunlit zones of the coral reef. Where are we? How much of the coral reef has been explored? We cover that. What is the smallest sea creature? What is the smallest sea creature? Depends how big the cells are, really. Actually, if you want to look at really small sea creatures, and this is algae, so single cell plants, but there's some really cool ones that make sort of little cases for themselves. Single-celled organisms, plants or algae that make cases for themselves. So look at diatoms, and that's D-I-A-T-O-M. And if you look at those online, you'll see that they make a nice sort of silica, sort of puffy jacket for themselves to keep them nice and toasty, especially if they're in the sort of northern waters of the planet. And then I'm going to have to see, remember if I can say it, but I'm going to spell coccolithophore. Coccolithophore, another really cool algae. If you know the White Cliffs of Dover, the sort of famous white cliffs on the south of England, those are made up of the sort of dead fragments of coccolithophores, this single-celled algae. And I think it's COCCOLITHOPHORE. And if someone in the office back in the UK can check my spelling and get that online. So look at those. Mind-boggling that they're making these wonderful structures at that scale. Gail would like to know, how does the reflection of the sun get to the bottom of the sea? It doesn't. So we have different layers in the ocean. We've got the sunlit layer. We're basically down to about 100 meters or so, but really sort of like 40 meters is where you get 0 to 40 meters where you get a lot of decent sunlight. Below that you get what's called the mesophysical twilight zone, where you're getting less light. It's sort of like the sort of dawn dusk zone of the ocean. Then you've got the midnight zone, where you've really got no light coming down to 1,000 meters and below. And then you've got the abyssal zone, and that's the large expanse of sort of muddy flatness that covers a lot of the depths of the seabed. And then you've got the Hadal zone, named after the Greek word for hell, and those are the massive trenches sinking down deeper than Everest is high, down into the ocean depths, and there is no sunlight there. Very strange things down in those trenches. In fact, over the weekend we know that there is a deep sea research vessel which is currently moored on Curacao, and we might be invited on board so we can tell you more, hopefully, fingers crossed, if we're allowed to. I don't know whether it's super top secret, but we'll try and get you some insight into deep sea exploration over the weekend. So, do you know how lionfish got to the Cayman Islands? So Lionfish are a big problem in the Caribbean. They are originally an Indo-Pacific fish, so lionfish, beautiful stripy fish with lots of sort of spiky bits on top. And in the Indo-Pacific region, so Southeast Asia, Indonesia, that kind of area, they have natural predators. Somehow they found their way to the Caribbean, and one of the theories is that they were in an aquarium and they got washed away, or someone said that they were pets and they got flushed down the loo or something. Anyway, somehow they got into the Caribbean and they don't have any natural predators here, and they are just going through the reef like nobody's business, eating up a lot of different animals here. So big problem in the Caribbean. In Bermuda and the Bahamas, I've got great campaigns going to help to bring them down, including eat them to beat them. So that's, making sure that we go and hunt lionfish. We're talking about sustainable fishing, but actually going and getting lionfish is really important, and having competitions to see who can make the tastiest lionfish dish. And then, how does algae grow on coral and rocks, and how does coral get its colour? Well, this end, I've just seen that we're 7 minutes over time. I've been rabbiting on like nobody's business, but it's been great to have you online. Coral gets its colour really from two things, one of which is from the algae that lives inside its tissue, and so those are sort of algae colours, so that's sort of reds, reddy, browny, greeny, yellowy colours, and then sometimes it makes proteins as a sort of sunblock. So those are where you get the sort of slightly more bonkers colours on the tips. But if you see anything that's really bonkersly colourful on the reef, that's normally a sponge. Wow, we are over time, and I know that there's things that are happening, so I'm very, very sadly have to cut off now. Massive thank you to all our schools who've taken part in the live investigation this morning. Stay tuned for more sessions. We've got Dr. Mark Vermey, who is going to take us into the wet lab behind us, give us a little bit of insight into the work that's being done here, and talk a bit more about the wider ecology of the reef here in Curacao. We've got an Ask Me Anything coming up after that, and then we've got the live investigation, expert interview, and Ask Me Anything again repeated for our audiences in the Americas this afternoon. Thank you so much for being part of the AXA Coral Live broadcast this morning, and stay tuned for the rest of the day, and come back on Friday even, where we'll be discussing how coral is being affected by increases in atmospheric carbon dioxide. Thank you so much, and it's goodbye for Curacao for now.